If the Word of God is what we say we believe it is, then it is worthy of our most rigorous scholarship and efforts and care and precision down to every last detail. And that conviction is what has fueled Tyndale House and their work over the last 10 plus years in creating this new edition of the Greek New Testament, ultimately for the sake of the health of the people of God.
The text of the Greek New Testament has suffered in some ways in the course of transmission. What we are trying to do is to understand textual variants by means of scribal habits, which is a sort of catch-all term for all the things scribes do wrong when copying.
By the late 18th century, people had begun documenting very typical mistakes that scribes make. But they were generalized across a whole number of manuscripts. So they would say scribes generally make these sorts of mistakes. What's happened in the second half of the 20th century and into the 21st is people have started asking the question, can we say what mistakes particular scribes make? There's been studies particularly on the early papyri, and so it's really benefiting from those and advancing those studies further through studies of our own that we've been able to start looking at the plausibility of how a mistake might arise.
One of the things that happened over centuries of copying is that the New Testament became smoother, and some of the individuality of the various authors disappears a little bit because of this harmonization. So when you're copying the Gospel of Mark and you happen to know the Gospel of Matthew by heart, you will start copying Mark with all sorts of influences from Matthew thrown in. So you get influence from parallel passages. And one of the results of this sort of harmonization is that the text picks up phrases from elsewhere in the New Testament, or sometimes even the Old Testament. That's very strong between Matthew, Mark and Luke, between Ephesians and Colossians. You get all sorts of influence from one sentence to the other. Now, this process is never so rigorous or so systematic that the original is lost whatsoever. But we try to reverse that process and go back to some of its original roughness.
We've used the early papyri, P45, P66, P75, and then we have, of course, the early majuscule manuscripts, Sinaiticus, Alexandrinus, Vaticanus, Codex Ephraemi Rescriptus, Codex Bezae. People might say, well, don't all Greek New Testaments use the early manuscripts? And the answer is they do, but we're using them in a way which ensures that any reading that we choose is actually something that was widespread in antiquity. So we are using a rule of having at least two early manuscripts that agree on any point that we adopt within our text, and that is different from other editions with Greek New Testament.
In this edition, you will come across spellings which are unusual, paragraph divisions that are unusual, and sometimes you also come across a particular sequence of words which you would not find in a modern translation. The differences are actually quite small, but if as a preacher or as an exegete you need a text that is as precise as possible, a text such as this Greek New Testament will sometimes affect how you explain a particular verse.
There's a lot of work which has to go behind each one of those investigating manuscripts, and I think people will see that when they read the edition, that a lot of thought has gone into each of these decisions. Our edition is something that ought to be on the desk of every scholar. We're not saying that they shouldn't have other editions. There are other good editions out there. But our edition will be historic as a documentary edition. That is, we are saying that the actual manuscripts ought to have a huge say in everything from paragraphing to spelling to accents to the actual text. All of our work doesn't change the theology of the New Testament, but what it does do is it seeks to fine-tune our perception of this most important body of literature that you can imagine.
We stand in a long line of scholars and Christians and church fathers who have a real passion to get the tiniest details of the Greek New Testament right. And I think that this Greek New Testament has made a significant step in getting even more of the details right than we had before.
We at Crossway are immensely grateful for the opportunity to come alongside Tyndale House in the publishing of this Greek New Testament, including making it available digitally, freely, to anyone, anywhere in the world. Pete and Dirk have simply given themselves to this project, now over 10 years. And the result is a text that stands alongside any other text that is available today. And the driving concern all along has been the preciousness of the very words of God.